First off, of course, big thanks to the museum for the invitation and for arranging this excellent conference. It really is thrilling to be talking just around the corner from where the Bellatung shipwreck reached its final port. By way of quick introduction, I'm a marine archaeologist. I've been working in the field for 20 years or so, going from the sublime to the ridiculous, from 2 meters of waters to now over 2,000 meters of water. In the last 3 years, I've been consulting extensively with Odyssey Marine Exploration, and it's about their work which I'm going to be talking today, and I have to thank Odyssey for letting me loose on their material. So now for something completely different in terms of technology and location, but addressing the same kinds of problems we're all looking at today in terms of how do we pay for excavations, how do we pay for marine archaeology, commerce, where is the interface between acceptable science and archaeology. Now, Odyssey Marine Exploration is a commercial archaeology company. It is a publicly traded company that raises extensive sums from private sector investment. The only other thing you really need to know at this stage is none of the operations are done using scuba. It is all done remotely with robots in international waters. Now, what I'd like to do briefly today, and I'm going to interweave these themes together, look at 4 things. First of all, the technology we're using. Secondly, fieldwork methodology, salvage companies, crudeness, etc. Is that applicable? Thirdly, results. What kind of new materials are we seeing? And I want to hinge this all around, for me, as a key word, seeking sustainability. Are these projects sustainable? You know, I'm sure, like a lot of people here, I get very frustrated, and I find it wholly inappropriate when the debate becomes very emotional and is framed in terms of forces of darkness, forces of evil. You know, this isn't Darth Vader versus Luke Skywalker. So, you know, I think if you can ask yourself the question when you're looking at these slides, what is sustainable, etc. And to do that, I'm going to look at 2 different regions and 4 shipwrecks or so. First, in terms of technology, all operations are conducted from a 76-meter-long Odyssey Explorer, where the archaeologist sits with his cup of coffee looking at the plasma screens and managing operations. But of course, the eyes and hands of the archaeologist in the deep seas is the remotely operated vehicle. And Odyssey possesses the most sophisticated deep-sea tool in the world called Zeus. It looks like a bit of a Frankenstein there on land, this big 7.3-ton robot, but it dances with all the dexterity of a ballerina underwater, if you will. It has various tools associated with it. In the middle there you can see a normal dredge system which both blows and sucks, and this can be changed live, the pressure, so it's actually more sensitive than what you have on a shallow water site. Of course, Zeus has 2 large manipulator hands which can lift everything up to 170 kilograms, but when you're dealing with sensitive archaeological materials, of course, on the bottom there we can see the limpet suction device which has been developed by Odyssey. And this adheres to the artifact. You draw on suction just to the right point where it can lift the artifact without breaking it. And finally, built into the back of the ROV is a sieve system. So when you're excavating in delicate contexts, the sediment can be sieved to the back. When the ROV is recovered, the archaeologist removes that compartment, and he can look for seeds, any small coins, bones, etc., that may have been missed from a context. Our first area to look at. Here we are in space looking down on the Western Mediterranean. Let me just have a pointer here. So here we are, the Straits of Gibraltar. We have Andalusia here, Cadiz, northern Morocco. This is the Atlantic Ocean reaching into the Western Mediterranean. And right here is the survey zone, the Alboran Sea, as it's called locally. Between 1998 and 2005, Odyssey surveyed using side scan equipment 400 square nautical miles, looking for its high-value targets. Of course, during these things, you're always finding other shipwrecks. In this case, 418 natural, geological, and cultural anomalies down to depth of 1,000 meters. And 6 of those are ancient. If you look at that side scan image, these things don't look particularly promising or exciting, and you send the ROV, in this case, down to depth of 709 to 913 meters. And this is what you see. Actually, very coherent shipwrecks, well preserved, up to 23 meters long, 7 meters wide, in cases up to 2.5 meters high. The bottom 2 are Roman sites with cargoes of amphora which originally contained local fish. The top left picture is a more interesting shipwreck, actually. Very briefly, it's 5th century BC, the age of democracy. But this is Punic, the Punics being the descendants from the Phoenicians. And prior to this discovery, we only knew about these kind of ships really from the odd piece that came up in a trawler's net. There's one other contemporary wreck off Majorca, but no photographs have ever been captured before. So this represents the first example of this kind of wreck ever found, and thus, makes a contribution to science. These kind of well-preserved, coherent shipwrecks assume much more importance when we look at what's going on in shallow waters in the Western Mediterranean. Peter Throckmorton, one of the founding figures in our field, wrote in 1970 in Shipwrecks and Archaeology, The Unharvested Sea, it is probably safe to say that there are no visible wrecks on the Spanish, French or Italian coasts under less than 150 feet of water, which have not been looted and fairly well destroyed. And this was concurred by UNESCO in an article published in 1987, where they put their hands up and said, well, of our 400 Greek and Roman wrecks found off France in the previous 20 years, all but 3 had been pretty much looted before the authorities reached them. Pretty damning statistics. And I would suggest, not only is Odyssey, by using a commercial model and finding these other sites while it's looking for its high-value targets, contributing to history, and there's going to be 3 scientific reports coming out on this work next month, but it's also giving us database entries for when, to protect these sites as they were for the future in these deep seas. Currently, you can only access these sites with an ROV, which is highly expensive, which does need a commercial model. This is the high-value target that Odyssey was looking for in the Alboran Sea. It's HMS Sussex, a third-rate 80-gun English warship that was lost in February 1694 during the War of the League of Augsburg. Without going into a lot of details, it was of interest to Odyssey because in 1694 it had £1 million sterling on it that was going down to pay off the Duke of Savoy to try and bribe him into being an ally and not turning and to work with the French. You can see at the top there a side scan image, very nice clear shipwreck, delineated sides, 79 cannon, 2 anchors. And here's what happened. Odyssey went to the UK government and said, we think we found one of your old warships. What do you want us to do? Is there anything on it? Yeah, £1 million. Okay, we'd like to make a deal with you. Very nice. Money does seem to change attitudes also in the West. A partnering agreement was signed, sealed and delivered between Odyssey and the government, whereby any specie or bullion found up to $45 million US, 80% would go to Odyssey. From 45 million to 500 million worth of species would be a 50-50 split, and anything beyond $500 million worth would go to the UK government. But that wasn't all. Another hoop we had to jump through was the UK government called in their best archaeologists to sit around and tell Odyssey how they should do their project at their own expense, which Odyssey was happy to do. It is a collaboration after all. And this consisted of an extensive non-disturbance survey to respect and record the shipwreck. And by the way, at the bottom there, you can see an example of one of the site photo mosaics that Odyssey does. This is made from about 2,000 photographs digitally stitched together. So one of the first things that Odyssey did on this particular project, an environmental study at 800 meters. They used the ROV to cut core holes down to 45 centimeters to see how the site was preserved beneath the sediment. And what they found, if you look at the top right there, the inner circle is the visual extent of the shipwreck, and the dark blue one was actually substantial organic remains that showed that actually the wreck extends 110% larger than we can see. An important point when you're planning strategy on where to dig. And at the bottom right, someone in the British panel said, well, what about the fishes? And Odyssey said, well, okay, let's study the fishes in terms of marine biological oasis effect. They found 14 species on it. And they counted every single sea urchin on the surface of the cannon to see whether there are any unique or important species that would be disturbed. They weren't, the fishes were safe, and activities continued. The first thing that Odyssey does really is it sets down an electronic grid system over a shipwreck, which you can see top left over the photo mosaic. This is fixed in time and space, so if the ROV moves, so does the grid. So the archaeologist can locate within the specific 1 by 1 meter the exact position of every artifact, from the cannon and anchors at the bottom and the bags of dumped rubbish from passing cruise ships which have danger asbestos written on them, all the way to single galley bricks at the top right there. Everything is contextualized. And at that point, when the real excavation starts, the Odyssey system is not to go for the golden glory. So you can see at the bottom right there, there are a series of 6 trenches which were excavated sensitively around the edges of the shipwreck to try and find out site formation, stratigraphy, level of preservation, and indeed length. At this point, the project pretty much stalled for political reasons. There was a dispute about where the shipwreck lay and where the Odyssey Explorer was going in and out of port, which I won't bore you with, it's all on the web. But essentially this site is now out of bounds to Odyssey and the British government, and regrettably this has nothing to do with archaeology, and it has everything to do with muscling the case of ownership over Gibraltar between Spain and UK government. Second area I would like to look at very quickly is the Atlas Shipwreck Survey project in colder climates. So here we are in southern England, and the survey region is west of the Channel Islands and all the way down south of Ireland. Between 2005 and 2008, Odyssey conducted this survey in the western approaches and western English Channel, covered 4,725 square nautical miles with a side scan and magnetometer. It's the most extensive offshore archaeological survey ever conducted. And of course, while you're looking for your high-value targets, you're going to find other interesting scientific material, which it does record. So 267 shipwrecks were found from the mid-17th century onwards. And these couple of sites I'm going to discuss, they're in 80 metres to 100 metres, so beyond scuba really, but not deep by Odyssey standards. Site 35F was an armed merchantman dating to 1670 to 1690, and the second most important wreck, I would say, within the survey zone. Nice collection of iron anchors, picking up from the earlier lectures. Here we are at the end of the line with elephant tusks on the seabed coming into Europe. And it had a collection of manila copper bracelets, of course, used to barter in Western Africa for ivory, gold, and indeed slaves. This is an incredibly important shipwreck. It's the only example of the UK with a cargo of elephant tusks in this particular type of shipwreck. And it's the most westernmost example of the type ever found. But there's something sinister going on here, which Odyssey is having to combat and to educate governments about. If you look at the side scan image here, you can see a series of parallel lines running through the seabed. These have been formed by bottom fishing trawlers dragging gear. In this particular case, scallop dredgers, which have very deep rake arms that go through the seabed and destroy any marine habitat and indeed cultural heritage in its way. These have gone straight through the middle of the shipwreck, so all that is left is the keel, which is pinned down by iron cannon. The frames and the strakes have disappeared. And you can see that bottom right. We've seen umpteen beautiful cargoes of southeastern ceramics from our audience today. This is what we get in the English Channel. Because of these fishing activities, not only do they destroy the hulls, they destroy the ceramics as well, which are ground down to sherd size to such a point when eventually they just get washed off by the bottom currents. It's an ever-diminishing return. And again, a case of something sinister going on. This is the case top left in 2008, where the team found 4 iron cannon set as saleable ballast over the keel. Bottom left, they came back a year later. Lo and behold, a 5th cannon has suddenly appeared at a depth of 80 metres over the end of the muzzles. Much head-scratching, and obviously it wasn't mermaids, and this is a case of bottom fishing gear again grabbing and dragging sites. And at the top right, you can see what these rakes of the scallop dredgers do. They go even through the cannon and make these linear lines. I hope you can see these here. And if you can do that to cannon, you can understand what it does to other shipwrecks. And because still in the UK, a lot of people think commercial company, well, it suits their argument, we pulled down satellite observation data from 2000, which shows that the shipwreck here is an area of intensely scallop dredged activity. It's non-controversial, in my opinion. So this shipwreck has no valuable cargo on it. Historically, it's very important. But without a particular commercial model in this example, we wouldn't know it. It would be lost to science. As it is, photo mosaic was made and a site plan. A report has been produced and it should soon be published. In the same region of the English Channel, this is one of the high-value targets Odyssey has been looking at. If you look very carefully at this side scan image here, you can see a snake. Oh, hello. You can see a snaking sandbar here and a smudge with some linear observations on it. The ROV Zeus went down on the seabed and bang, landed on an area with 43 bronze cannon. You can see here these beautiful royal crests on it. There's a crown surmounting a royal arms and a foliate vegetation on the side, which is typical of the reign of King George I of Great Britain, dates to the 1720s. This particular period, in this particular region, there was only one shipwreck that fits this profile, HMS Victory, of course, the predecessor to Nelson's Victory, Battle of Trafalgar and all that, down in Portsmouth dockyards today. HMS Victory that we found was a first-rate Royal Navy warship, built 1737 to 44. Very briefly, it was on going down to Lisbon in July 1744 in Portugal to liberate a British convoy fleet that was needed to supply the Mediterranean fleet. It had been blockaded by the French in the harbour of Lisbon, in the river mouth. Sir John Bulchan on the Victory went down with this mighty, ferocious shipwreck. I should say that HMS Victory was described at the time in 1744 as the greatest warship in the world. It had 110 bronze cannon on it. It had a crew of 1,100 people, 3 decks. It was not only a floating village, but I suppose the equivalent of an aircraft carrier with nuclear capability, all about shock and awe. And of course, the French saw this thing sailing over the horizon towards Lisbon. They disappeared pretty sharp. Victory followed them all the way down to Gibraltar and then turned around to make its way home. But then on the 5th of October 1744, the rest of the fleet got home, Victory vanished. Well, obviously scientific, this is unique. There's no other first rates off the UK. But in addition to this, according to the Amsterdamsche Courant, which was pretty much the Financial Times of the time, of the period, HMS Victory took on board a commercial cargo of £400,000 at Lisbon on behalf of Dutch merchants, which is about 4 tons of gold coins. At this point, we went to the Ministry of Defence in the UK. Obviously, warships in international waters are still sovereign immune, which Odyssey recognises. We gave a presentation to the Second Sea Lord. They were very excited. They said, look, you know, our records say this thing went down on the Channel Islands and you found it 100 kilometres away. Can you go and get us, you know, real proof? Which we already had, but, you know, it's important from a press perspective as much as anything else. And the team went back, did a comprehensive survey, all kinds of artefacts from the galley, spar remains, human bones on this shipwreck, including a skull. The left you can see a stone, a gunner's stone for grinding and sharpening bayonets. And the real kind of clincher on the shipwreck, the smoking gun, if you will, is this beast of a cannon, this 4-ton, 42-pounder, 3.4 long cannon. These things are only found on first-rate warships, and HMS Victory was the last ship in Great Britain with a complete consignment of bronze cannon. It's utterly unique. The only other example was salvaged in the 18th century, and the cannon were all melted down to be put into Nelson's column. So between June and October 2008, Odyssey conducted an extensive non-disturbance survey. Every artifact on the seabed, its position, its orientation, etc., were recorded. A master photo mosaic was created from 2,820 photos, and a site plan produced. I don't really want to say much apart from it's a pretty big site, 61 by 22 meters. You can see the bronze cannon. Up here to the northeast, we have the bows with 2 large anchors, one 6 meters long, the largest that we know about. And down here we have the rudder. You'll notice there's lots of archaeology here. Here we have a series of iron ballast blocks showing the longitudinal line of the keel, but no archaeology over here. We don't know, without doing any excavation, whether that's because the ship fell over to port side or whether it's just hidden beneath sediments. And just to conclude on these case studies, where do we stand with this unique piece of maritime history, the greatest mystery in British maritime history, actually, that has now been solved by Odyssey? Well, the Ministry of Defence were very interested. They get it. Her Majesty's government would like to see their cut of the money returned to the Treasury. But because of the UNESCO Convention and concerns about that in the UK as much as anything else, there was concerns about Britain needs to be seen to be doing the right thing. And very wisely, the Ministry of Defence and the Department of Culture, Media and Sport, they said, we'll throw it to the people. So they had a public consultation last year, and they asked 3 questions. Firstly, should we leave everything on the site in situ and manage it thus, even though we don't have the money or the technology and there's fishermen going all over this site with bottom gear? Secondly, should we lift up all the bronze cannon and then leave everything else on the seabed and manage it in situ? And the third option is, should a commercial company come along and fully excavate this shipwreck, record everything, conserve it, bring it up, give it to the government, put it in a museum, pay contractual services to Odyssey, give them a split, it's their warship, it would be their option. At the moment, we're still waiting for a result on this. I've been arguing very passionately and I think very obviously that it would be completely inappropriate and irresponsible to leave this ship in situ. And let me just give a couple of minutes of why that is. If you look here, you can see a bronze cannon here. This is the natural state on this site of what happens with bronze cannon through galvanic coupling in association with iron. You get this thin but hard crust of concretion. But something strange is going on this site. You can see here the concretion has been broken open. Here you have scratches all the way down the barrel. This year, the team returned to the site just to have an observation, and they found cannon had been dragged all over the seabed, including this one with these deep scratches on it. 2 cannon in the modern era, 2 of the muzzles have been completely smashed off. And I've spoken to specialists, the only thing that can do that is an object, a trawler, moving at velocity with its bottom gear and its 5-ton iron net, which smashes through the cannon. So it's very clear what's going on here, and we hope to have a satisfactory response soon. And when we looked at the video and the observations for all the other 267 shipwrecks in this zone, we found out that 115, 43% displayed evidence of impacts from deep-sea fishing. And you can see here, here's our poor little shipwreck, HMS Victory, and this is all satellite observations of fishing activity from 2000. I think it's pretty clear what's going on there. And let me just finish with a comment, if I may. Commercial marine archaeology need not be one thing or the other, but can, and in cases does exhibit intertwined mutual philosophies. Just because companies like Odyssey are driven partly by the lure of profit, this does not mean science plays second fiddle. In the westernmost Mediterranean Sea and English Channel, surveys have identified numerous new and internationally significant shipwrecks, many currently unique within the archaeological record. Such contributions to science would not have been possible without private sector funding and a robust commercial model. Deep-sea shipwreck archaeology does not come cheap. Daily operations on a fully outfitted, dynamically positioned ROV support ship runs at a minimum of £20,000 a day, with a full technical and archaeological team. So far, Odyssey has invested in excess of $20 million in the Atlas Shipwreck project in the English Channel of Western Proteus, a long-term financial and scientific investment. Our work in the deep suggests that concepts of in-situ management need to be assessed on a site-by-site basis. In cases, it is simply inappropriate. While the Punic and Roman shipwrecks in the Alburan Sea are stable and can be managed in situ, the situation in the English Channel is critical. Sites like the 17th century armed merchant vessel carrying elephant tusks and the unique first-rate Royal Navy warship HMS Victory are at high risk from mechanical destruction caused by offshore fishing trawlers, a user group identified by marine ecologists as bulldozers of the deep, but the marine archaeologists remain contently oblivious to. Almost all of the great discoveries in medicine and science derive from profit-motivated investment. Today, industrial business parks ring universities worldwide. Why is archaeology impervious to the world around it? Arguably, there is a need for some change, a change that is measured, controlled, quantifiable, and monitored internally and externally. A change that is sustainable. 80% of the world's seas remain uncharted, and the great museums of the deep that await discovery are not, contrary to the views of the founding figures of deep-sea archaeology, frozen in time and inner space. Certainly when it comes to shipwrecks lost beyond the depths of scuba, the future isn't coming, it's arrived technologically. It's time to wake up and smell the seaweed. Or as Marie Curie once wrote, nothing in life is to be feared, it is only to be understood. Now is the time to understand more so that we may fear less. Thank you very much.